Without my slides prompting me, I'll talk a little bit about the project, which is, this is funded by the Chittenden County Regional Commission for the town, on behalf of the town of Underhill, who applied to have this study done. What we're doing is called a scoping study, and it's going to look at the costs and feasibility and different alternatives for both a walking and biking project in the village, which might be, multiple projects. There has been already some funding available, and I'll let Brad talk about details. People have questions after, to get a sidewalk started right in the center of the village. And so that's going to probably move ahead on a timeline, and then we're looking at both encompassing that, but going well beyond, out to Sandhill Road and then over to the Mountain Road. And so so through the school and right through the village. So that's the physical scope, and we'll have, there we go. So tonight, here's our agenda. We're going to talk about the project purpose and need. There we go. And then we'll talk about the existing conditions. We've been, doing mapping and some site visits and trying to understand what the project constraints are. Talk about what design objectives and criteria would be for either a sidewalk or bike path, and some options to start considering, and then next steps. So if we go to next. So again, what we're talking about, we're calling it a scoping study, and that is a type of study that looks at feasibility and the project definition. We're not like launching right into design. Nothing's going to get built as the result of this study. It would be, but this study would provide a set of plans and a cost estimate and enough information for the town to then apply for funding to actually do construction, or maybe build pieces of it with local funds. So it's basically within the Underhill Center designated village. We just got started late last fall, and the project will go through probably June or midsummer of 2024, so another few months. And again, I think I introduced the partners, but especially you. This is a chance for us to hear from people who will be affected by it and be able to use it, of what you think. And we want to have you consulting throughout the project. There's an emphasis on getting community input. And then if we go to the next slide, I borrowed some slides from some nice work that I think it was the Recreation Committee did on looking at the project, but there's a whole bunch of benefits for doing this kind of work. It's safety first, and then connecting people to the towns, getting to the school with active travel. And when I say active transportation, that means walking and biking. So I try to avoid jargon, but sometimes I do. And then getting lower traffic speeds with more people walking, more infrastructure along the side. It does tend to have an effect of reminding drivers they're in a village and that people might be walking. Walking for social opportunities, and then maybe incorporate some trees and green spaces into the village. If we go to the next slide, and these are the lists. Also, I borrowed this from the work of the Rec Committee. There's a lot of destinations within the city. This is like what the kind of priority connections would be, but we do want to hear what people think on the map as well. So we'll be factoring that in. And the next slide. So when we do a project like this, we want to do what we call a purpose and need statement to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page about what we're doing and why. So this is our draft purpose and need statement, and we welcome comments from you now, or as we we'll get it online, and so you can comment that way. So the purpose of the study is to explore options, cost, and feasibility of active transportation infrastructure in and around the village of Underhill Center between Sandhill Road and Mountain Road to accommodate active modes of transportation, enhance accessibility, mobility, and improve bicycle and pedestrian safety. And the need is to provide a safer and comfortable movement for people to travel by all modes of transportation throughout the study area that reinforces the town's goal of promoting active transportation, and to support village livability and vitality by providing safer and comfortable walking and biking facilities for various age groups and abilities to village events, town-owned recreational areas, and the school. So really just about connecting people in a safe and enjoyable way. So I put a few pauses here for questions and comments in the interest of not wanting to spend too much time so we get through, but at burning question, we can take 1 or 2 burning questions.
You'll have to come.
Oh, yeah, you need to come and,
Mike here.
want to put that there, and then, so that's green, so you're on.
So I'm Peter Duval. I'm an Underhill resident. I live in Underhill Center. Experienced the full life cycle of a child in Underhill Center. The purpose and need talks about active transportation, which I think includes more than biking and walking, but just generally people moving around on their own power. But so far, it looks like the presumption is that there needs to be a sidewalk in Underhill Center. And I feel like that's way ahead of the problem statement. So I hope you'll find a bigger map than what's been shown so far, and provide folks an opportunity to show where they really walk. Thanks.
Great, thank you. With nothing further, what I'm going to show now are some of the maps we've been doing to look at the study area, and that's, apologize, it's a small area for you to look at, so people can, welcome to come up closer, but this is a map showing, I don't want to get too far tonight, but Sand Hill Road and then out to Mountain Road. And the purple squares are all town-owned property, which is kind of a neat opportunity that there is a fair or school-owned property, a lot of publicly owned resources in the study area to think about connecting, and also that it might be easier to get permission to construct anything if something does get proposed and advanced. So one of the other features is elevation and topography that will make any kind of project more challenging to construct. So that's a thing that we definitely look at about where will it be easier. And the red lines are all the contours, so you can see where it's got solid red means a lot of contour lines. So there's the areas that we see most challenging are out towards Sand Hill Road on the north side of the River Road. Then getting up to the school, that circle in the middle is another challenging point. And then it gets a little steep on at least one side of the road going towards Mountain Road. So there's a few areas where it will be, more challenging to build. So another thing we take a look at are the river corridors and floodplains. It really is something we're trying to avoid, construction in a floodplain. And for the most part, so there's 2 major river crossings in the study area, and the bridges, I'll talk about them in a minute, but not as much as in some villages is the whole village in the floodplain, so we'll be able to avoid being in the floodplain for some good parts of it, but it's definitely a constraint both for permitting and, trying to stay out of rivers to let them meander as they need to. So here are some of the bridges that we'll be looking at that are definitely also going to be a constraint to thinking about, if we want a sidewalk, how would it fit on the bridge, or do we need to build a new bridge or widen an existing bridge? So there are two major structures for the Browns River. So one of them is about 28 feet wide, one's about 30 feet wide. This is potentially wide enough to have a small sidewalk and the travel lanes, but it's a little tight. And then there's also a couple narrow older culverts that are quite narrow. So probably providing a separated pedestrian crossing would require a separate bridge, most likely. And we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because we don't want to be proposing things, but that's why we do take a look at these structures. And this is just a lot of other culverts and drainage structures too that we'll be looking at. This is just a map that the state has a pretty good inventory of them. So some wetlands, fortunately not extensive wetlands immediately adjacent to the road, but we will want to definitely try to avoid wet areas and hydric soils and wetlands buffer areas. So most of the road edges of the road are clear of wetlands, but a little bit up by Sand Hill and some spots in the middle. And of course, we may find more wetlands exist that we aren't on the official maps, and we've been starting the project in late fall and had snow cover most of the time, so we'll be taking a better look at that in spring. Wildlife corridors is another thing. There's no big issues here, but this is sort of the list of things that we look at. Obviously, the river's a sensitive place, and it's likely that none of the alternatives we'll be thinking will really affect the river if we can stay up on those bridges. And another thing just to screen out that can be an issue when something's built are anything that might have hazardous waste. There's no, known issues, but we do take a look at where there are underground tanks in case if there was a project going forward, there might be a need for some testing for contamination. So it's just, Wells Market and very few spots, but we'll be, noting that in whether or not they might be affected by any construction. And then there'll be a whole historic resources inventory. Again, it's important to, there's a lot of wonderful old buildings here. We want to make sure none of them are really affected by a project. And UVM Consulting Archaeological Program will be studying both historic buildings and archaeological resources. And those will be other important things to look at as we think about feasibility and permitting of a sidewalk, bike path, or other infrastructure. So this is just a kind of a quick summary of what we've been finding. It's calling a constraint map, where I have the color-coded lines along the project area. The dark red are the steep slopes, which are, not necessarily impossible to build on, but quite a bit more expensive. The light blue is where there's water, potentially wetlands, or a lot of drainage. Yellow, as we get into the village, there's a lot of curb cuts, and driveways and buildings are quite close, and so that's going to make, trying to think about how to get a safe place for people to walk a little more challenging. There is some on-street parking that I think is used a lot and valued. We'll want to work around that. And then, anyway, so those are what you can see. There's issues on both sides of the street. What we immediately see is it's not like an obvious thing that it should all be on one side of the road or the other. It's probably likely that we'll be crossing back and forth if, for a sidewalk or path. So, any other burning issues on anything that I've just ran through quickly? So, all right, well then, we do look at the crash reports, and this is a map from the state base, but let me just point out the project area is pretty much in here. Very few crashes, but interesting, right by the steep bank and curve that I know a lot of people mention. It seems to be the place where the most record of crashes. Fortunately, not a lot of no big patterns of crashes otherwise in the village. It is really helpful and that's why we asked about safety, because where you feel unsafe or where you've observed near misses is something we want to know about, because we don't have a lot of data that the crashes are telling us. So, Peter?
Are any of those pedestrian bicycles?
None of them involve pedestrian bicycles. There's like a head-on collision and somebody running off the road, so. All right, well, why don't we move on to... So in thinking about providing safe places to walk and bike when it's in the public right-of-way, there are some legal requirements. There's the American with Disabilities Act and the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, called PRO-WAG. Those are things that really are anything in a public right-of-way is obligated to follow. So there'll be a lot of design constraints about grades and curb ramps and how wide things are to make it really easy for people to travel by, especially in wheelchairs or any other, and it's even helpful for people with strollers or walkers or anything. So to make it comfortable, those are not really an optional guideline. As far as our design objectives, to think about laying out some alternatives, we would really try to avoid environmental resources for permitting purposes, and obviously there's a lot of people value the environment here, clearly. Preserve parking. There's not a whole lot of parking, but there's a few spaces across the street from the post office, and our observation is that that's probably convenient for people to get their mail, so we would probably want to try to preserve them, and if people have feedback on that, that would be helpful to hear. saving trees and, plantings and whatnot where possible. And so those are the basic approach we look at of trying to minimize the impact and make it attractive and comfortable. So if we go to the next slide. So there's some design criteria that we'd think about for, again, meeting those accessibility guidelines and making it, safe and comfortable for walking. For sidewalks, there's a minimum width of 5 feet. It can even go down to 4 feet for a really short, very short pinch point. A desirable width for sidewalk is 6 feet, just to encourage people walking side by side. If someone has a stroller, maybe 2 strollers. So that would be the aim. So if there's room, 6 feet is a nice width. A shared use path would be another thing to consider that is wide enough for biking. Shared use means walking and biking. And that's a question we really have is, where would you want to see that wider facility for biking versus having bikes in the street and maybe people walking on the sidewalk. A shared use path is desirable to be 10 feet or even wider on its really busy path. This is probably, 10 feet is probably a good width. And it can go down to 8 feet when there's a pinch point or, some constraints, but it gets, not as comfortable feeling at 8 feet to have like 2 bikes coming to each other. So 10 feet might sound pretty wide, but that's a width that will make it comfortable and, serve a busy time. The other thing we want to look at for a sidewalk in particular, if you have the travel lanes of the road, we need to provide some type of separation between the cars and the people walking, obviously. And the 2 different ways that can be done is vertical. We'd have the sidewalk at least 6 feet above the level of the road with some type of curbing, or it can be a horizontal separation. You want to be at least 5 feet from the edge of the travel lane, which would be like a green strip or something. So that all, all affects the amount of space that we would need to provide something. So a few starter ideas that have been talked about, and I appreciate Peter's point of not assuming, not jumping into too much assumption, but there have been discussion ideas for having a sidewalk in the village, and then potentially maybe it makes more sense for shared use paths outside of the village where there's a little more room. It's something to consider. There's different types of materials. Any input you have on that, but there's the typical sidewalk in the village is concrete sidewalk, maybe with a granite curb or maybe with the green strip. Asphalt is sometimes used for sidewalks. It's not quite as durable. It's has pros and cons, or even gravel can be used for usually not a sidewalk, but a shared use path that might be more compatible with a more rural setting. It does need to be a really firm surface and rolled out so it meets the accessibility guidelines. And that can have some, maybe lower cost. It might be a little harder to maintain, so there's a lot of trade-offs to be thinking about. So we can think about, a curbed sidewalk that's right next to the street versus an uncurbed sidewalk that has that 5 feet or so distance from the edge of the street. And that's a kind of a nice option because it provides place for snow storage. It does push the sidewalk, further towards a house and there are a lot of homes that are right outside of the street right of way, so that's going to be, a tricky thing to be looking at. Another thing to think about is lighting. In the village, providing some type of pedestrian lighting is something that could be a consideration, be part of the project. There are more and more options for solar lighting if there's just a few spots, because putting a whole conduit with a lot of lighting does add to the cost, but it really kind of creates a nice welcoming environment when it's dark, and it does get dark here early. One of the things we'll be thinking about are, as you noticed on the map, there's probably not going to be, it probably won't make sense for a sidewalk, if that's the way things go, to be all on one side or the other. There'll be needs to cross. That's partly maybe due to impacts, partly to get people connected to, say the market or the school, and things are on different sides of the road. And so we can have crosswalks to connect them, obviously. Another thing to consider, and this is, for the town especially, is to do what we call raised crosswalks. This is where it's a speed hump where traffic would go up and then back down, and the crossing would be at a higher level. And that's something that can help highlight to people driving through the crosswalk. It's a way to increase the visibility and potentially reduce speeds. So, and then the other opportunity there is just some placemaking. You know, once we have a place that's easier to walk through the village, there could be places to make some benches or places to gather or enjoy the river or whatever. So there's opportunities to kind of connect people to places to recreate and gather. So here's a starter idea again, and we're putting this out partly because it's easier to get your reaction. So if this is not what you're thinking, we'd love to hear other ideas. What I'm showing here is that white line would be potentially an area where a sidewalk makes more sense. Part of this is the presence of buildings really close to the road would make it really hard to get a shared use path. And I think the hope is that speeds would be lower so people can bike on the roadway without feeling in danger. And that would go from Range Road up to the school. And it would also allow kids to get all the way into school. And we do want to get down to the recreation area as well. So, and that's not really identified here. And then potentially a shared use path in that light green area on the outskirts of town is something that, throwing out an idea and getting any thought. And this is a separate project with the APRA funding is to actually get started. There is some funding for the town to start building a sidewalk, and that would go, so the upper right corner there is the school, and it would come right down to the town property and the intersection here. And again, crossing the road a few times, partly gets the impact, and partly to get people to, the town offices and the historic sites and whatnot, and to the recreation area. One of the challenges, too, that we can look at in this map is where is there a safe place to cross if we're on the south side of the street, right here in the town offices, say, where's the right place to cross so we can get kids up to the school that has good sight distance and, there's a little bit higher speeds coming in. So we're going to be looking closely at that crossing, make sure it's in a place that'll get used and be convenient, but also safe. And I think the exact extent of that project will be based on funding and how far that goes. So just to also get discussion started a little bit, these are just photos, not around here necessarily, but for village sidewalks, there's definitely opportunity, as I was saying, to do lighting, to carve out some parking spaces in important places, to do landscaping, and other design features just to kind of accent things, and so we don't have to necessarily do a purely plain vanilla sidewalk, but they're both options certainly. So, and I'm thinking about lighting might be a particular something that we'd also like to get input on. And then again, it's possible to, have a sidewalk curve around to avoid utilities or trees or other resources. And I think a goal would be to try to get a green strip between the sidewalk and the street where there's room. And again, it's good for snow storage, so we don't plow the snow from the road right onto the sidewalk, and a little opportunity for water to filter and kind of slow down from the runoff. So this is a clip from the Beers Atlas, or the Sanborn maps, and I just thought this was kind of interesting. Brad provided it. So Main Street's kind of making a curve there, and then, the roads in this map are called High Street and Academy Road, and it's now Krug and Green Street. So, but what we see there is a great big wide area in the middle where it looks like there's a place of kind of mixing and much wider right-of-way than what we see today. And if we go to the next slide, what we've been thinking about, so that's how it looks. Those red lines are approximately what the historic boundaries were, but that's where we have the town-owned green space right in that little triangle, and that seems like an opportunity to think about what that area could become, make it easier to walk to and enjoy and potentially gather, and things it could be incorporated into the design to have that be a gathering space of some sort. It's all town-owned property. And apparently it used to be all wide open, and here's just a ground level shop. So obviously there's trees and nice landscaping, but this is a chance to make it more accessible to bring people in and provide other things for people to do there potentially. So, and love to hear any ideas that you all have, and again, more questions and discussion. So, yep, why don't we hear from you first? Oh, why don't you come here and you can talk right in here.
Do you
Oh yeah.
do you think that the sidewalks from Underhill are going to connect to the ones in Jericho?
To connect it to where?
To the ones in Jericho, or
Not probably for this project, because that's a long way, but you could start somewhere, and that might be, is that something you'd like to see?
yeah.
So, good. All right, well, that's a good thing to plan for. So, thanks. Oh, were we thinking about building a sidewalk that connects to the sidewalks in Jericho? So, a good aspiration.
We have a question online. I'm just going to ask you to mute that. And is it?
I had one question. I'd like to know why Sandhill Road would even be part of the village. There's not much of a destination to Sandhill and vice versa. So why would that be really a place to start a sidewalk? Second of all, I've 35 plus years living here on River Road. A lot of these old farmhouses are very close. You're talking 10 feet. You're putting sidewalks right through somebody's yard, if not right underneath their living room window. So I do have concerns with that shared path. And also said, like I said, why are we starting at Sandhill as opposed to starting maybe at the bridge at Wells Market, which makes more sense. What else?
So,
And the need.
to answer the question,
I mean, I don't see a lot of foot traffic up and down River Road, walking to Jericho. And but I do understand, the school to the store, make it maybe a little bit safer for sure. But, kids don't walk to school. They don't even ride the bus anymore. Parents are dropping them off daily. So again, where's this need really coming from? But my concern is starting at Sandhill and the width of these paths affecting the residents that have lived on these roads, and necessarily putting everybody now in their living room.
well, I can try to address from my understanding that one of the reasons to go to Sand Hill Road, and it's not the highest priority potentially, but that people do walk the whole loop. They go to Sand Hill and then loop around back into town, so that there is some amount of use of it, and maybe there'd be more and more people able to walk. It is it's probably wouldn't be the most heavily used, but certainly something to consider. And absolutely hear you on the width, and that's going to be, one of the biggest challenges of the project is how much room is there. We can try to narrow the travel lanes a little bit, which would also potentially reduce speeds and keep people, away from people's houses, but absolutely understand your concern. Thanks.
I have a similar concern. I really would like it to be safer to walk. I live on River Road. Our house is very close to the road. We put in planting on the road for us and more intimate. But putting a sidewalk, it would really be, like Andrea said, right outside our living room window within feet. And I'm sad to say I wouldn't want the sidewalk in front of our home because of that reason, but I would love sidewalks in the center for sure. So we live right by the bridge, heading into town, 270 River Road.
Can I say something?
Yes, when you come to the microphone, yes, we want to be
I also live on River Road, and I agree it's not ideal to have a sidewalk right through your front yard. There are two sides of the road, and I personally have talked to most of the landowners, if not all of the landowners along the route, and I do believe there is a route we can do that makes sense, that is feasible from the school to Sand Hill. I do think it's super important that we put this in place because there's tons of traffic through the area. Kids do still ride the bus. My kids ride the bus every day. Cars drive extremely fast around that curve right in front of my house by Sand Hill before the bridge. And I just want to push forward the fact that I think, although it will affect certain people, I think taking all things into consideration, our town needs to do this for the safety of our town, because people aren't going to stop recreating on these roads.
Yeah, you see Mike down here.
Could you turn yours in for him? Turn it
The
on.
mic is for public record, and if you could introduce yourself before speaking, that would help too.
Hi, I'm Roy Towlin. Lived in town for 30-some years. I want to push back on the notion that kids don't walk or bike to school anymore. That's kind of a circular argument that doesn't really make a lot of sense here. We've got some new people near us who want to have their kids walk to school, and they can't because it's not safe. I mean, so to say that people are not interested in walking or biking to school, I think is a specious argument. It makes no sense whatsoever. I think if we have the proper infrastructure, you'll see a lot of people walking and biking to school.
Laura Seaman. I live on Range Road, and I can agree that it will be difficult for those who live where the sidewalk would impact your home. I agree. But I don't think we should ignore the safety issue. I walk nearly daily between Range Road, sometimes over to Stevensville, sometimes to the school, sometimes to Mountain Road. I have been nearly hit multiple times. People do not slow down. People do not give me. I've felt a car brush my pant leg. So there is very little room for error, and I'm an adult. I know many of my neighbors who have kids would love to ride their bikes with their children over to the tennis courts or the pond, and they don't because it's not safe. So I can attest that there is a lot of foot traffic, bike traffic, adults, kids, and I think there would be a lot more if it felt safe.
My name's Anton Kelsey. I live in Pleasant Valley Road. I'm also the chair of the Recreation Committee, which was spent a lot of time and energy getting us to this point today. So I would like to take a moment just to thank the folks involved for having us here to discuss this. I just have a couple points. One is one of the big reasons the Recreation Committee put this forth is we every couple of years do surveys of folks in the community of things that they are interested in doing in our town. And walkability and sidewalks and bike paths rise to the top every time and are very popular with folks that do our surveys. So I think, one thing to recognize is partly why we're here is people have really asked for this to happen. Number two, and this is kind of a question, there's a lot of different interest, I think, in doing something like this in our town. And I think my question is, what's the process moving forward to consider the different feedback? Like, obviously, we're here now and people are giving some different opinions, which is exactly why we're here. But I'm just interested in, how your company solicits different feedback. How do you incorporate that into the plans? And then once you take all that feedback into account, how will further things be presented later on? Just, for me, what's the process? Where will different spots where people can give input? Will plans be put forth, and then more feedback will be solicited, like, what does that look like? And I think a lot of people are interested in not only what you might come up with, but where are times when we could say, hey, this looks great, here's a concern, what about this, and that sort of thing. So I'd like to hear some info on that.
Yes, and I think we had a slide of next steps, but I'll just summarize them here. So the general way these studies go is we'll take this input. We'd love to have more involvement, whether it's me with the Recreation Committee and other groups. You know, there'll be people, like I said, supporting it. There'll be people concerned. We want to really hear that feedback in a more concentrated way once we probably have some sketches down. Like at this point, we haven't designed anything yet. So, and we'll develop alternatives, which might be a shared use path versus sidewalk. It might be one side versus the other. When I'm picturing it, there's going to be a lot of variations of which side and probably a number of crossings. So really lay that out and then really try to get, you know, we really want to hear from people and try to address concerns before we go further with the study. So that alternatives process, which will be coming up, you know, April and May, will be really important. And so we'll work with Brad and think about what our different forums that we can bring that. There will be another public meeting like this. We can have, you know, plans laid out, but getting other input from stakeholders and interested parties is important. So, and then by the end of the probably June, July, we'd be wrapping up with the study with recommendations and cost estimates. And if it needs more time than that, we probably can, you know, take the time we need. But. So how about Peter first, and then we'll hear from you again.
So I'm Peter Duval, and I have a question first, and then some comments. This study's being funded with ARPA money, I think? No.
No, this is for Chittenden County Regional Planning's planning funding.
I got the impression that the ARPA committee had reserved some funds for this. And I guess that gave me the impression that this would be more flexible scoping study than what would conventionally come from traffic engineers who, sorry to say, sidewalks are meant to get people out of the way of cars, and crosswalks are meant to constrain the movements of pedestrians. This is something that I don't think people in Underhill Center are used to. This is the land of Eve Shakespeare, cross-lot walking all over the place, and we used to be able to ski from here to Smuggler's Notch from the village, you know, on a vast trail and on the Madonna Vasa. I did not see a Strava heat map, let alone Strava Metro map, and these would definitely illustrate that Underhill Center walks in the woods. It's not, I don't know that there's as big a desire to walk along Pleasant Valley Road or River Road as there is to get into the woods and get to the top of the mountain, or as you said, get down to the flats. I mean, that seems like a really desirable trail to have. To come to the mountains and decide to put the kinds of design constraints that would be in a city on our topography is a pretty strained idea, I think. And I believe, the last time I checked, our zoning prohibits curbing, which makes this stormwater thing non-conforming, but I think a presumption that there would be have to be an urban section here in order to accommodate a sidewalk is a little premature. Thanks.
Thanks. And you want to have it come in?
My name is Rory Dillon. I'm in 3rd grade and I go to Jericho Elementary School. And I live on Beartown Road. And I definitely think it's important, like, because when I go to Browns River Middle School in about like 2 years, I would love to like be able to bike to from there to Browns River, but to the Browns River Middle School, but it's not safe to go on like Route 15 because like some people like, don't pay attention when they're driving, and it's not safe. And also like I love to like be outside and go places that like not just with a car but outside, like on a bike or walking. It's just, I'd love to be able to go like to school or places like that you would have to go with a car, like with a bike or walking, because it's better for the environment to go with like walking or biking than with a car. And it's not safe at all on Route 15 because there's really no space until you go like down, and you can't walk down there. But I definitely think it would be important, definitely, for me to be able to go like to bike or to walk or whatever, just to be able to like go to school or go to the town pond or go to play tennis, like, or any activity. But I definitely would love to have a sidewalk, like, because it's not safe on the road. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
So Bob Stone, the chair of the select board. I guess I'm really appreciative of your time here tonight. I really appreciate you putting out the green cloth so close to St. Patrick's Day and so many people wearing green tonight. So I'm appreciative of that, and I'm looking at everyone interacting tonight and listening very carefully to the words that are being used tonight, and I'm hoping that this will continue. We possibly are going to need to, I'm taking away from this that there's a lot of interest in this and that we may need to consider a different venue, because we're getting a lot of people and a lot of interest, and I think that's great. So that may be something that we want to consider, going forward, is that, this may be something that will outgrow, the town hall, that we may want to look at other things. But I know we have a schedule, and I think we can give another 5 or 10 minutes as a select board, but if the conversations need to continue, that's great. But I think we can give another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll have to excuse ourselves. 5 minutes, I'm being told. And then we'll have to excuse ourselves and get back to trying to deal with the rest of the business at hand. And I really appreciate the different generations of people in the audience tonight with all the different perspectives. Thanks.
Somebody can hear me, I think. Given the constraints we have in through the village, and there's been some comment about making a multi-use path, and we have to cross the road several times. And while I will not be walking through the village probably, I do ride my bike through here. And even if it's a multi-use path, I'm not going to get off the road, get on a multi-use path, get off the path, go to the other side of the road, get back on the road again. I'm just going to ride through town as an adult. Now, obviously, little kids aren't going to do that, but if they're going from the school to the pond and they're taking their bike, they'll go on the sidewalk. So given the restraints, I think we ought to eliminate the thought of a multi-use path and just kind of stick to something that we can get done and just consider it a path, a sidewalk, and forget about trying to make it 10-foot wide. Plus, we don't want curbs because that kind of messes everything up. So, you're not going to have enough space to put something that, so maybe we should just stick with a narrow one.
Thank you. And I guess one thing I didn't mention, it is probably something that would evolve in phases. And, one first piece might be the ARPA funded sidewalk, and then go from there. So it doesn't have to be all or none and only out to Sandhill Road or not at all. So the other thing I'd love to get input too is what would be the right kind of forum to be sharing these ideas over the next few months. Because I know when we started, Brad said, we need a lot of engagement. There's going to be a lot of discussion, and I'm glad to get it started tonight. But we want to make it very open and to input and have everybody be able to weigh in, so.
I would just say if you could express your thoughts in writing and send them to us, or Cy was also, his email was linked. This is Cy Sarapelli. He's with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. He's an engineer, and Cy and I worked on the sidewalk in Underhill Flats together. So I would suggest, yeah, either reaching out to Lucy, myself, or Cy, and so we can gather everyone's ideas and thoughts in one place.
Hi, Patty Richards. I'm on the select board. Question for you about process. So you've put up a hypothetical draft. It's not one you're proposing. That was my takeaway from how you started. What is your process for next steps, and then ultimately putting a draft in front of people for more, this is a more concrete, excuse the pun, more definitive document to look at, or proposal to look at?
So, well, the next step would be, considering everything we've learned here, and again, all the mapping, to actually try to look at solutions, and it could range from anything. I think there's sidewalks and shared use paths. I think we've all heard that shared use paths might not fit, and we probably may find out, at least in the village, once we start laying it out, but we want to kind of give everything a thorough look. There's also things that could be incorporated, like traffic calming, doing things to slow down traffic. I don't know if that's ever been a consideration, but we'd want to come up with a lot of ideas and different options of, which side of the road, how wide, is there a green strip, is there not? We do want to look at, can we pinch down the roadway a little bit to get a few more feet of space as well? It's not like it's overly wide, but we can see what's possible, and bring drawings and visualizations back to the community to weigh in. So, and certainly have a lot of discussion, and that's what the process allows. And then following that, try to come down to a preferred alternative that, and it's often, not everybody 100% typically agrees, but try to capture the essence of, minimizing the impacts and maximizing the benefits and meeting the goals as much as we can, and just try to document it so everybody kind of understands the rationale. So. More questions or feedback?
So next was same concerns like unsafe locations on this road for crossing as well as walking on this road. So feel free to reach out to me or Lucy or Brad. If you have any questions, just shoot us emails. We'll definitely consider those things in the development of concepts and alternatives.
So I think we're going to step away if we're ready, but I encourage everybody to keep the conversation going. It's being recorded here. It'll be on YouTube and on Mansfield Community Television for everybody to see. So